So there is one other area, one other concept when it comes to conditionals, and that is the ability to use switch statements. Okay, so we can use a switch statement. Okay, so okay, so what is a switch statement? Well, a switch statement is just another way to write an if-else statement. So what we're going to do, we're going to use the keyword switch, and we're going to specify a constant. Okay, and by a constant value I mean either a character, an integer, or some version of an integer. Okay, so we're kind of limited when it comes to what we can provide as a constant value. So we cannot use strings. All right, we cannot use strings. All right, so whenever you see the switch statement being used, it tends to be a very simple value in here. So what we're going to do, we're going to use the switch statement to determine whether a value is a vowel. All right, so what we'll end up doing, we'll say a switch, whatever the user types in, and then we'll have these different cases. So there is the keyword case, and then what exactly we are checking for. Okay, and followed by a colon. So if it turns out that the person enters an A, then we will simply print out a vowel. And so this second part here, which is break, is very important. By putting a break statement, we effectively exit the switch statement, and so we do not execute any of the code that comes below. Okay, so we would check for A, E, I, O, and U. Now finally, if we do not match any of these tests, then we will execute the default. So the default is like the else. Okay, so if everything else fails, then we will say not a vowel. And finally, we can then say break. Okay, although in this instance, the break would be optional because we don't need it. Okay, so when it comes to the default, we don't need to put a break. All right, so let's open up our browser or open up our Replit, okay, and implement this code so that we actually see what it looks like. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to ask the user to enter a character. Okay, so again, let's follow the pattern. Cout, enter a character. Okay, or actually that's not a good word. Enter a letter. Okay, much better. And then of course we need to create a variable for that. So I'm going to say char, and I'm going to say letter, and then obviously I'm going to store that. Okay, now this is where we do the actual case, the switch actually. So normally would have used an if and else, but here I want to use a switch instead. Again, the switch is simply another way of writing an if else. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to simply say switch. Okay, and then I'm going to say I'm trying to see what letter is. Okay, so curly braces, and then I'm going to start doing my case. So the first case is checking to see if it's an A. Okay, colon. If it turns out that it's an A, then I'm going to say something like cout vowel. Okay, and then this is the important part. I must actually put a break. Okay, so I need to actually say break. All right, I need to put that, and that is the first check. And then of course I'm going to repeat this, and so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say case, and I'm going to say E, okay, colon, I'm going to say cout, and I'm going to say vowel, okay, and again I must put a break. Okay, if I don't put a break, then the switch will continue running, which is not what we want. Okay, so I will just copy and paste this to save time. Okay, so A, E, I, okay, O, and finally U. Okay, so if I leave this, okay, I'm not going to put the default as yet, just to show you. Okay, so if I run this, all right, and I enter Z, okay, nothing happens. All right, so if I check it with A, you know, it works. If I check it with E, it works. Again, if I check it with let's say U, it works. So what I need to do now is to make sure that if I use something that is not a vowel, that it actually gives a default message. So for that, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say default. Okay, and so the default will simply be something like oops, let me move this in. Whenever you're writing your code, it needs to be well formatted. Okay, it's easier to read that way. Okay, so I could say cout, not a vowel, new line. Okay, so let's try this again. This time we're going to put in Z, and we should see this default being executed. Okay, Z, not a vowel. Okay, so again, this is using the switch statement. Usually we would have, we're checking a character, we're checking an integer. Okay, now what will happen if I removed the breaks? Okay, you will notice that our program seems to execute everything, right? Because the whole point of the break is to have the program leave after it has found a true condition. So let's run this, okay, and let's put A. Okay, and so notice it's doing everything, including the default. And so that's not what we want. We want it to only do one thing and then exit. And so that's the reason why the break is so important. All right, without the break, then it will execute every case, which is not what we want. Okay, so that's it for the switch statement. Again, whenever you have simple code or simple instructions that you want to execute, then you can use a switch. And again, notice it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 6 things. So having to write this in an else, in an if else construct might take more work. So if you feel like you want to not do so many if else, then you can simply reach for a switch. Okay, now we don't use the switch quite a lot compared to the if else if. However, I still felt like I needed to show you the switch statement because you might run across it in some other people's code, and I want you to know what it is and how it works. Of course, you will be expected to know how to use it, and you will be tested on knowing how to use it. Okay, I'll leave that here. That's all I need to cover. That's all we'll be covering in terms of concepts for conditionals. I'll see you in the next section.